In this tutorial, we will be going over how to integrate specific API calls onto the user's interface depending on their role on your marketplace. By the end of this video, you will be able to incorporate various API calls into your marketplace so that users of all roles may use them. We will be implementing 3 different types of APIs, one that can be used by all users, one that can only be accessed by any registered user on the item's detail page, and one that can only be accessed by merchants on the home page. I have opened here the JavaScript file that will contain the majority of our code. Let's take a look at the getAllCategories API first. As you may already know, this API does not require any authentication, therefore a token is not necessary for this function. I have the code pre-written right here. Let me go through and explain what each section is trying to do. This part of the code is what renders the button onto the user's interface. This button should be available to all users, even guests. Therefore, there is no need for any user ID checks. This section of the code is associating the button click to its function, which is simply calling the API and console logging the response. I have already uploaded the plugin and installed it onto my marketplace. Going over to my marketplace's homepage, all I have to do is check the functionality of the button. Now that you know how to configure APIs onto the user interface, let's take a look at how to specify certain parameters such as what role the current logged in user is, as well as what page the user is currently on. Open here is a JavaScript file that contains the code for the next 2 API calls. The 2 API calls inside of the code is adding an item to your cart for buyers and creating an item for merchants. You'll be able to download the source code in the description. There are 2 conditions that are checked. One is whether the user is a merchant and is currently on the marketplace's homepage, and the other is if the user is a registered account, meaning a buyer or a merchant, and is currently on the item's detail page. If either of these conditions are met, then the plugin will execute its code accordingly. Give me a second while I upload the plugin onto my marketplace. First, I will log into a buyer's account to see if the Better Add Item to Cart button is there. Let me check if clicking this button will in fact add the item to my cart. It seems that the plugin works for the buyer side, so now we have to check if the merchant can create an item from the marketplace's home page. I have here one of my standard merchant's account, and by simply logging in and scrolling down, I can see a Create Items button. If I click on this button, we can see that a new Hello World item has been created. This concludes the basics of user-side API calls through the use of plugins. The next tutorial will go more in depth on specific API calls, such as custom fields, which will include a whole new coding language called PHP.